Why did you not show up even when you were in Washington in your Senate office to vote on that issue? Okay? I mean, you have to put your money where your mouth is, and if you're a candidate. And I think one has to put their feet to the fire in that particular case. The amount of... It's often said that we have to depend on oil right now because the other alternative energies aren't competitive. Well, if you look at the tax benefits and write-offs for oil compared to the tax benefits and tax credits for wind, solar power right now, they're not even the same orders of magnitude. I happen to write commentary biweekly for the New Scientist, and I wrote about this. And I used a number that I have to tell you, I have to qualify this because I didn't check it, but I assume the New Scientist had checked it in their editorial. I was talking about McCain's claim about batteries and why it was a specious argument. A $300 million prize sounds like a lot, but as I said in the piece, if $300 million could solve the energy crisis, it wouldn't be a crisis. Okay? These are much bigger issues. And if you total up the total amount of tax credits that ultimately relate to oil or petroleum products, it's something like $250 billion, compared to something like 25 million, which is spent on research now in solar energy, and the tax credits that are going to make these things economically viable for people to take something from forefront research and turn it into something that people can use in their homes, better solar cells. You need to if you believe those things need to be done, then government has to provide incentives. I firmly believe, I sound like a political candidate, but I firmly believe that private enterprise should be encouraged, and one of the ways to do that is tax incentives. Okay, but I also firmly believe it's very important to realize is that you can't just do it in the private sector. That the kind of research that led to what you're talking about, which may lead to a specific device, is curiosity-driven research usually. You're trying to understand something. And at this point, it's only the government that funds it. And that's important to realize. That's a change. It used to be that you could depend at some level on private industry to fund it because we have monopolies, okay? Bell Labs was a good example. Bell could fund one of the greatest scientific laboratories in the world because they essentially had a monopoly, right? When they had to become competitive, what happens? Bell Labs is basically died, and those scientists have gone elsewhere. Long-term solutions to social problems, often from the time you do research to the time it changes our society, might be a generation. You can't expect private industry to invest money that won't produce a payoff for 25 years. It just isn't economically viable. And so government has to help lead the way, as well as promote private industry in that regard.
Will you run for president?
If I could get rid of the skeletons, I would, yeah.
Start killing them now.
Yeah, that's right.
Dr. Krauss, I offer for your comment a reason why it may be so difficult to foster scientific debate. And I'd like to begin it with Gresham's law, which in economics says bad money drives out good. Bad money being a weak paper dollar, people will spend that and hoard the good, enduring gold dollar. In the politics of science, it seems to me there's a corollary, which is a non-empirically grounded issue. Debate of a non-empirically grounded issue will drive out debate of an empirically grounded issue. And I think I know why, or I offer for your reaction this explanation. People don't like to be embarrassed. And it is embarrassing if you take a position on something where you can be empirically proven wrong. Therefore, people tend to stay in areas where it's much harder to prove them wrong. Would you comment?
Well, sure, I'll comment. I mean, absolutely, in some level. That's why you often avoid fact-based discussions in politics. But I think it's more than that. That's been true for a long time. That's an enduring truth, perhaps, that it's embarrassing to be proven wrong on some fact. I mean, you know, and the more basic the fact, the more embarrassing it is. And I think that was one of the reasons we had to explain this wasn't going to be a science quiz. We wouldn't ask how many planets are there, okay? Which no one the right answer is 9, by the way, okay? It's not 8. I don't care what they say about Pluto. It's always going to be a planet to me. But anyway. But I think it's worse than that, and you know, nothing I'm saying is particularly original in this regard. But I find the quality of the media discussions to be, I really think the media is a huge part of this problem. And part of the problem is the 24-hour news stations. And there are two things. On some detailed, complex issues, you have to have a detailed, complex discussion. I mean, may need 10 minutes, okay, to discuss it. This is not going to happen on a TV news program, usually. And the reporters will try and find issues that they think will change ratings, and those are usually sensational issues. And I just think the quality of I'm just so embarrassed by the quality of especially TV journalism in this country, that I think without serious questioning of the candidates, you'll never get serious answers.
Lawrence, this is Jenny Brown. In relation to some of these other questions, 14 questions is a broad spectrum, and it covers so much in science.
Yes.
When you get the answers and we move into the next phase, which I highly commend you on, the fact that this is laying the groundwork perhaps for the next presidential election, is there a way you could think about focusing on the ones that seem to be elevated to the highest level as a result of what happens in the presidential election? We will see which ones kind of rise to the forefront. Could we assemble our group, and then also what could we do individually and organizationally to support that effort?
Okay, Jenny, those are two good questions. It would be great to focus this down. We had by the way, this was focused down when we asked people to give questions. 37,000 questions were submitted. Okay, and so this was focused down to 14. And the interesting thing is that I would choose 3 or 4 that I would think are key ones. But I've discovered that even in a small group that the overlap between the 3 or 4 essential questions that people think are essential is not so great. I think it's obvious that there will be key issues, and it would be great to focus these down. I think actually being at a forum like this is really useful, because now I can go back and talk to the other steering committee members, saying, how will we use these? And no, the first step was to try and get them, and believe me, that was a non-trivial step. But how can we refine them? How can we use them? How can we publicize them? And again, how can we get organizations to support that? One of the things, of course, one of the ways to support is for the organizations, and I don't know if the Great Lakes Science Center was on that list. Is it on the list? If it isn't, it should be. So that's one of the first ways you can, making this, in fact, the AAAS had made it an important part of their agenda by by focusing at their national meeting this particular issue. So I think that scientific organizations need to raise the profile of these questions in their national meetings, and then the other thing that we need to do is to get more scientists to become active in public life. I mean, here I said I wouldn't run for president. If you give me $300 million, I might consider it. But we had 2 PhD members of Congress. I'm happy to say we've increased that by 50%. Bill Foster, on a special election, won the seat of Dennis Hastert, and he's a physicist at Fermi National Laboratory. He's up for re-election again, and against a rather wealthy candidate, and we could increase that. But we really need to get more scientists involved in public policy. So they're part of the problem too. And so one of the things we've done, I'm chair of the Forum on Physics and Society, the American Physical Society, our outgoing chair. One of the things we did this year at our national meeting was we had a session where we brought in people like Rush Holt and others to run a session on how to run for public office, not just for Congress, but for school board, what you need to do. And so I think we need to train people for that kind of thing as well. And so there's lots of things we need to do, and there's no shortage of them, and we'll try and do some of them. I guess second.
Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a special program featuring Dr. Lawrence Krauss, Director of the Center for Education and Research in Cosmology and Astrogeophysics at Case Western Reserve University. Thank you, Dr. Krauss. Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.